So you have people there who basically, I think, decided that they had to make a stand at this time. As I walked around Hong Kong, it occurred to me, I had something worth its weight in gold in my pocket, which was a U.S. passport. I had my ticket out, but these people are there. They're young. They have their whole lives ahead of them, and they don't want to live in oppression. They don't want to leave the West and join sort of the repressive Chinese Borg, if you will.
You're listening to Code Red with Secure America Now, the largest national security grassroots army.
Welcome to the Code Red broadcast of Secure America Now. My name is Alan Roth, Chairman, President of Secure America Now. Today we have as our guest Christian Whiton. Christian has served in various American administrations and foreign policy positions of great importance, including dealing with the North Korean situation. Christian is a popular face on television, as he is a commentator on Fox News as well as other media outlets. Christian also writes quite a bit. He's the author of a book called Smart Power, which I recommend that everyone buy and read. And Christian, welcome to our Code Red broadcast.
Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's great to be here.
Christian, you recently were in Hong Kong. American news sources have been covering the situation in Hong Kong, which has been protests and most recently protests at Hong Kong's international airport, which has gotten violent. Can you give our listeners some background as to Hong Kong's situation with China, as well as what triggered the most recent protests, which we are all now witnessing through television and other media?
Right. Well, yeah, and I should stress that the vast majority of protests, some of which I attended earlier this month in Hong Kong, are peaceful. It's gatherings of people who trend young but come from all walks of life. You have clerks, you have bankers, you have civil servants. It's kind of shocking because people who usually are risk averse and not getting into politics who are turning out at these things. Obviously, the cameras are going to be drawn to the violent confrontations. Obviously, there is some of that. We saw it at the airport, and you saw it with some of the younger students who were confronting police and going to police stations. But by and large, this is much broader, much more peaceful. And the reason is, Beijing has slowly been boiling the frog, if you will, eroding the promises they made in the joint declaration with Great Britain in 1984 when they agreed to hand back Hong Kong in 1997, and also in something called the Basic Law, which is supposed to govern, Hong Kong after the handover. In those promises, Beijing promised to respect Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy, accept that Hong Kong would be governed by Hong Kongers, and also to have democracy with universal suffrage. That was supposed to occur by 2012. And Beijing has reneged on those increasingly. It subverted the process of democracy because the only people can run. It's a little bit like Iran. You can run as long as you have the support of Beijing, so it's rigged. And it's basically, you just had with a recent law that would have allowed extradition to the mainland, you had Beijing push too many times that this would import political repression from the mainland into Hong Kong. Basically, if you do something that would be considered treason on the mainland, they say, we're going to indict you and you're going to get deported to the mainland and we're going to throw you in prison. So you have people there who basically, I think, decided that they had to make a stand at this time. As I walked around Hong Kong, it occurred to me, I had something worth its weight in gold in my pocket, which was a U.S. passport. I had my ticket out, but these people are there. They're young. They have their whole lives ahead of them, and they don't want to live in oppression. They don't want to leave the West and join sort of the repressive Chinese Borg, if you will.
If you put yourself in the shoes of the rulers of China. Why is Hong Kong important? And I'll ask you to speculate as to what you think ultimately China is going to do if these protests continue.
Hong Kong has always been important because, and this is why even under its heyday, under Mao Zedong, China did not move to take it away from the British, which they could have done, since 1967 after Britain abandoned everything east of Suez, more or less. There was a minor military presence there, but they could have taken it anytime they wanted to. And they didn't because it was useful financially. It's been a conduit through which China reaches the world and also gets access to capital. And it's been useful to both the West and to China for that reason. That's what's at risk, actually. If they do make a move, whether it's a PLA invasion, a People's Liberation Army invasion, a Tiananmen-style massacre, which I think is unlikely, or more likely an invasion by police from the mainland, paramilitary and civilian police, that would put at risk Hong Kong's separate status. We passed a law in 1992 that said that the handover is coming in 97, and we're going to continue to treat Hong Kong as a separate trade entity from the mainland as long as they adhere to their promises to keep it, separate, to have it have autonomy. And Congress can always take that away if it wants to, if it thinks that Beijing has really subverted everything in Hong Kong. And so can the president, and there's also a law pending in Congress to make this even clearer. What I think is going to happen, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, has really painted himself into a corner because if he moves aggressively into Hong Kong, he runs a risk of even more financial trouble, really the end of foreign investment in China, which has already been reduced because of the trade war. But if he lets it go on, it's this constant reminder of China's broken promises, and it's a constant reminder of dissent against the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah, in this case, it's just people in Hong Kong who have never really been under true CCP rule. But I think we all know that people on the mainland would share some of these same aspirations for freedom. So I actually am optimistic. I think Xi, because he has so many problems on his hand, he's losing the trade war, the economy is slowing down. I think he'll actually try and de-escalate and maybe assume he's going to handle this later when the spotlight is no longer on Hong Kong. But there's always a risk that he moves much more aggressively.
Do you think that Americans should be paying more attention to what's going on in Hong Kong? Is there anything tangible that's at stake for the United States? And thirdly, do you think that the United States, what policy, if you were president of the United States, what policy would you promulgate in terms of how to deal with protests in Hong Kong?
I think the president has, he's gone through a couple of iterations, but I think where he is now is in a good place on Hong Kong. He just tweeted recently if President Xi would meet directly and personally with the protesters, there would be a happy and enlightened ending to the Hong Kong problem. I have no doubt. And I believe it was yesterday he said, I hope it works out for liberty. So previously the messaging from the White House was, well, this is an internal Chinese issue. We don't want to get involved because we're focused on a trade war. And I understand that. Donald Trump does not run a human rights NGO. He runs a government that has interests, economic and security interests that must come first. But I think we should pay more attention, and I think the administration is paying more attention because, frankly, this is a great way to put pressure on our chief adversary in the world. It's serendipitous that it advances human rights and things that we Americans believe in, but by causing this crisis for the Chinese Communist Party, for the government, at a time when we're, frankly, at a difficult point in negotiations, and we're at loggerheads, where they continue to militarize the South China Sea and challenge our presence in the Western Pacific. So, the inspirational argument is democracy surviving, freedom on display in Hong Kong, and that could spread to the mainland. And the more, is perhaps cynical but calculated view is this is good for U.S. national interest because, essentially we have someone in our adversary's camp advocating for a very different political future.
I failed to mention in my introduction of you that Christian is an advisory board member of Secure America Now, and as someone who deeply cares about the security of the United States, you touched upon China and its role in the Hong Kong situation. Can you comment on the ongoing negotiations between the Trump administration and China? Do you have any sense as to what is happening? Has there been any positive signs that we're making progress, meaning that American interests are being furthered in these negotiations?
Well, the trade talks, they're interesting, and clearly President Trump wants to leave an open door if China wants to be reasonable. But the amount of change that we are insisting on from China is significant. Peter Navarro, who reports directly to the president, calls them China's 7 deadly sins. It covers things like intellectual property theft, support for state-owned enterprises that makes what otherwise would be uncompetitive businesses competitive, basically handouts from China to governments run or to companies run by their cronies, and also the export of fentanyl, deadly fentanyl from China to the United States, which can be correlated directly with the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. It's quite startling. And so throughout these talks, the president's team has insisted not just on buying more of our stuff and maybe lowering the deficit a little bit, but on some structural changes, and also the ability to reimpose tariffs if they don't comply, because China almost never complies with its agreements. It didn't comply with its agreements in Hong Kong. It didn't comply with any of the agreements that it made to get into the World Trade Organization in 2001. It promised President Obama to his face that they would not militarize their manufactured islands in the South China Sea, and they broke that promise. Promised Obama to his face they would stop cyber attacks on us, and they broke that promise. So it's not trust but verify. It's sort of distrust and verify with the Chinese, and that's what Trump has stuck to. Going into the G20 summit in Osaka in July, there was a lot of hope, a lot of hype that we were going to get talks back on track and forestall additional tariffs. And coming out of that, it looked like they were back on track, and the president held off for a while on tariffs, but then subsequently our negotiators, and that's in Shanghai more recently, came back, reported that the Chinese are really just being intransigent. And that's when the president said, okay, we're doing tariffs on sort of the other half of Chinese imports that haven't been tariffed yet. We're doing that September 1st. He since revised that to September 1st to December 15th to allow U.S. businesses time to move their supply chains out of China, which is happening on a very significant basis. If you look at the amount of investment in Vietnam as cheap manufacturing moves out of China to other places that are not facing U.S. tariffs, it's a very impressive economic move. It's hurting China a lot. But I think, it's sort of at a stalemate, and I think the president realized this. He's tweeted this. The Chinese think they can wait him out. They mistakenly think the Democrat is, likely to win. I think historically that's unlikely. And regardless, they fail to appreciate this sea change in Washington, and you see it in the Congress of changing from optimism about China to skepticism about China and recognition that they are, perhaps our chief adversary in the world.
It seems like that since the time when Richard Nixon opened American relations with communist China, that America has closed its eyes to many of China's negative actions which directly affected the world, but specifically the United States of America, and also its internal barbarism when it shut down the protests in a very violent way at Tiananmen Square. Given this rather lengthy history of closing one's eyes to China's aggressions, do you think that this is the appropriate time for the United States to put a stop to that type of blind-eyed, let them do what they want, have a small protest, but let's not do anything significant. It seems like the Trump administration is saying, now's the time, we have to change China's behavior, and the only way to do that is by standing up for what America believes in a very strong way in talks with China. Do you think this is the right time to do that?
Yep. The right time would have probably been 10 years ago. I think when President Trump came into office, the feeling, and I remember hearing this from more than one senior official at the White House, is it's now at a point where it's now or never. I mean, I think people feel a little bit like the protesters in Hong Kong, in that, wow, now that we have given every benefit of the doubt to this government, and also it just makes sense to reevaluate our approach. If Richard Nixon were here today, I think he would be okay with the idea that you might reevaluate policy after 40 or 50 years, and that the entente with China that made so much sense at a point in the Cold War where we were in a tricky spot, about to lose in Vietnam, in economic crisis, where it made a lot of sense to try to divide two communist powers, divide China away from the Soviet Union, which required the Soviet Union then to worry a lot about China. And today the factors are very different. We know that this policy basically of thinking the best about China, the view that political liberty would inevitably follow economic liberty, all of that has kind of been disproven. And so, yes, I think that the time is overdue, but still appropriate now to get tough on China and to use tools that we know will work. So extracting promises, that doesn't work. Talk, dialogue, international fora, going to the UN, the WTO, the UN Human Rights Commission, none of that works. What does work are tariffs, using our economic power and other power against China. That's what's gotten their attention. And if they want to make a deal that improves the terms of our trade, that's great. And if they don't, that's fine. We can punish them economically and diminish their ability to make trouble for us and for other free nations around the world.
Want to keep up with our efforts outside the Code Red podcast? Go like our Facebook page, Secure America Now. Follow us on Twitter at Secure America and follow us on Instagram at Secure America Now.
I want to switch topics. As we are speaking, as we're recording this podcast, there is a uproar over a decision by the State of Israel to deny access to the State of Israel to American congresswomen who are very staunch critics of the State of Israel and frankly would like to see the State of Israel disappear. Those are Democratic representatives Tlaib and Omar. What do you think of the decision by the State of Israel to deny these congresswomen access? And before you answer that, let me just share with you something you may not have seen. But the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, a news report is saying that she is slamming Israel's decision to deny admission to two Muslim American congresswomen, calling this a snub to them. What do you think of Israel's decision? Does Israel have a right to do this? Was it a good move, bad move? What's your thoughts?
Well, Israel absolutely has a right to do this, and I think it was the right decision. Apparently, if you looked at their schedule, the proposed itinerary of these two congresswomen, they were declining senior meetings with senior Israeli officials, and going to spend more time in Palestinian areas. If you look at their background, they're in favor of the boycott and the divestment movement. They are anti-Semitic. extremists. Pelosi, it's sort of sad that she has to stand up for them since they've called her a racist and would like to, frankly, get rid of her as speaker and replace her with someone even more radical. And yet their power, despite having won extremely few votes in districts, are throwaway districts, if you will. Nonetheless, this is where the Democrat Party is today. So the idea I think some had was that, they could go over and they'll see firsthand that Israel is a free country that protects the rights of all of its citizens, including Arab citizens who can vote in its elections, and is in a very tough situation and doing the best job they can. But they would never go and report that. And if you look at the broader quartet, which includes Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, look at their own trip to our southern border where they came back to Washington and completely lied about what they saw, completely smeared our customs and border protection agency officers who are doing their best in a very difficult job. So I think this was smart for Israel. President Trump also requested this course of action, and I think it's good. I mean, we should put these people in their place and understand what they are, which are anti-Israel, anti-Semitic crazies who unfortunately have a lot of power right now over the Democratic Party.
I think your point about their trip to the southern border and how they took the facts and they threw them out the window, and they used the trip as a platform for attacking the administration and its immigration policies. And I think I agree with you. I think the same would have happened if they were allowed into Israel. One more point that I would make is that Israel actually has a law on the books, and it has been used to stop supporters of the boycott movement, which seeks to destroy Israel from access into the country. So this is not just a move against these two congresswomen. It is a move against people who oppose the existence of the state of Israel. Christian, I want to thank you for once again giving us some extremely important insights into major policies and news stories that are occurring as we speak. Hong Kong, China, Israel, the Trump administration, and I look forward to having you as our guest sometime in the near future.
All right. Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you for the work that Secure America now does. And it's great to be here, and we'll have to come back in the future.
Excellent.
Thank you for listening to Code Red with Secure America Now. We are the largest national security digital platform in the nation, dedicated to bringing critical security issues to the forefront of the American debate. For more information, visit our website at www.secureamericanow.org.
Don't miss a single Code Red podcast. Subscribe today on Spotify, iTunes, or Podbean. You can also find the Code Red podcast on YouTube. Search for Secure America and subscribe to our channel.